Okay, so I want to tell the story of Edward and Mary. It's a pretty bloody story, even though I disagree with Bloody Mary as a name for her. There is still it was a violent time. There's quite a lot of violence going on. Please take a copy of the print. Yeah. Please go down. You must not let people that back. And so we will be looking at the kind of people dying for their religion, dying for their beliefs. This was going on. Okay, yes, shock horror. Okay, but it's true. Okay, that's why I want to impress upon you. This was happening. Okay, so. Let's begin by talking about the last years of Henry VIII. And first, of course, his marriage to Catherine ends, and his second wife, as we saw, gets her head chopped off. Well, he had 4 more wives after that. The third wife gave him the son that he wanted, but she died just a couple of weeks after giving birth. So he got his son, who was Edward, would be the next king, but his wife died, so he married again, a German woman. He hadn't met her. He married her for political reasons, but when they did meet her, he didn't like her. So he ended the marriage quite quickly, a few months later, saying that he didn't like her. Then the next wife was Anne Boleyn's cousin, and she suffered exactly the same fate. She was accused of sleeping with other men, and she had her head chopped off. In her case, perhaps there was some truth to it. She was playing a very dangerous game, and she had her head chopped off. And then finally, he married Catherine Parr, and she lived beyond him. So some students were saying, did he just marry because he wanted a son? Well, he had a son, but he still married 3 times after that. Okay? But on the other hand, did he just marry them because he wanted sex? Well, he was king. He could probably sleep with any woman he wanted. He didn't have to marry them. In fact, he did have 1 son, at least, outside his marriage, by a woman who was not his wife. And it's clear that he had relationships with other women who were not his wives. Okay, so 6 wives plus lovers. That's Henry. Okay, so what did he achieve? Well, he did extend English control over Ireland and Wales, but he didn't really achieve much in Scotland and France. All he did was spend a lot of money and cause trouble at home. Scotland and France became closer than ever, and England was sandwiched in between 2 enemies, and economic troubles were brewing up at home. The cost of Henry's wars was high, and part of the money came from the monasteries, the shadowing, selling off the shadowing. But another problem was that when the money was becoming short, Henry decided, let's mix cheap metal with the money. Now, anodidai, 1 pound coin equaled 1 pound of gold. 1 shilling of silver equaled 1 shilling. Okay, the metal was the value of the money. Okay, now we have paper, a piece of paper. It's worth nothing by itself. Okay, just we all trust each other that saying yin is saying yin, but it doesn't. It's just a piece of paper. Okay, but in those days, money had its weight in metal. £1 of money was £1 of gold. And Henry started to mix cheap metal to make the money cheap, but keep the price up. But people didn't want this new money, especially kokusai no baibai. You know, international trade fell. People said, well, this money is homono janai. Okay, it's not really silver. We don't want it. Okay, so that caused a crisis in the economy. And these were the problems that Edward had to try to solve, and, well, he couldn't. He couldn't. I mean, he was just a boy. He was only 9 years old. So he had the economic problems. He had the problems with Scotland and France. And basically, he was not able to solve those problems. So let's take a look at him. Let's take a look at Edward and his life. Short life. So, the boy king, Edward VI. He was only 9 years old at the time, and actually, of course, a 9-year-old boy was not in a position to control the country. So his uncle, the Duke of Somerset, Edward Seymour, was the person who had the basic control. He had the title of a king's protector. He was supposedly protecting Edward. Well, here he is. Here is Edward Seymour, and in the beginning he was okay, but there were problems. He made some bad decisions, and in particular, the relationship with Scotland and France was not working out well. Basically, England lost against Scotland. England lost against France. Well, that meant that Seymour was in a certain amount of trouble. The political results of failing to win those wars against Scotland and France, the political results were negative for him, and he lost his position of power. He was replaced by John Dudley, the Earl of Warwick. Okay, bye-bye, Seymour, and hello, Earl of Warwick, Dudley. So Dudley became... Do put in these little things to keep you awake, you see. So that's what happened there, and although he was controlled by these people, he did manage to have some influence on policies in England, especially religion. So Edward and Protestantism. He basically was strongly interested in the Protestant religion and in the reforms, and as I think I said before, for the first time the country began to have real Protestant church. So, as you know, under Henry, England was basically Catholic, although he'd split with the Pope. But under Edward, Cranmer, Ridley, and Hugh Latimer, who you saw burned last week by Mary, if you remember, they established Protestant reforms, but they were, later on, they were going to be burned by Mary. And we have some interesting pictures here. Here is one of the reformers, Latimer, here, speaking to the young king, speaking to Edward. Here he's at Westminster. So at the Palace of Westminster, we have this kind of scene. You can see the courtiers all there listening to what's going on. You can see how information and ideas were communicated in those days. I think this is, interesting and important for you to see. We've got the internet. Okay? We've got television, radio, we've got all sorts of ways of communicating. That's how they did it. Okay? There would be all these courtiers standing around who could listen to what was being said, and so they could spread it to other people. But that was how communication took place. Somebody probably would write down what was said. In fact, Latimer himself would probably have written down most of what he was going to say. That would very often later be published, or it would be copied and spread out among people. This is how they exchanged ideas. This is how communication took place. All right? So we'll come back to that because I think that's an interesting and useful thing to know. How people lived and how communication took place. What everyday people's lives were like. So that's the first thing, that there were these public places. Westminster Palace is not exactly a public place. The second one is a more public place. This is actually a public space here, a very important public space in London. From the picture, it looks as if they're inside, but this is only because there's a big kind of tent, a canopy for Edward, and they put up a special pulpit for, again, it's Latimer, and this is St. Paul's Cross. In London. This was a big public speaking place, and it was more open to the general public. You can see over here, it was a huge area. And they were able to fix the acoustics so that if somebody spoke in a loud voice, they didn't, no microphone, of course, but people could hear. People could hear. So people would crowd in to hear what the debate was, and in this way, people would understand the important topics of the day. Okay? I will come back to these public speaking places and show you a little bit more about how people communicated and what those spaces were like, so you can imagine a little bit about the everyday life of people at that time. Okay, so that was basically Edward's life, and he's followed by his sister, who is known in history as Bloody Mary. Well, some of that is, quite right. She did put a lot of people to death, but I don't think she entirely deserves that name because it was a bloody time. Now, Edward was the son of the third of Henry VIII's wives, and when he died, he had made these Protestant reforms. The most important reforms were that priests finally were allowed to marry. Remember, in the Catholic Church, priests are not allowed to marry. Edward allowed the priests to marry. And the second thing was to have a book of common prayer, an oinari, prayer book, in English. Even though he had allowed a translation of the Bible, the prayers, the service, the misa was in Latin. And so ordinary people couldn't really understand it. So those were two of the big reforms that Edward instituted, but then of course Edward died. Also, hundreds of English Protestants who were living in exile in other countries came back to England thinking, oh, now it's a Protestant country, now it's safe for us. Big mistake, of course, because it wasn't going to be safe, because Edward would shortly die. And then Mary. Remember, Mary is the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess. Catherine was Catholic, Mary was Catholic, and she went straight back to the old Catholic religion, including allegiance to the Pope. So, 100% カトリック教会になりました。And Mary is best remembered for the burning of about 300 Protestants during her 5-year reign. And now again, please don't misunderstand me here. I am not trying personally to say that Mary was particularly bad. I want to show you あの時代の人々の考え方. She became a kind of legend of bad Catholics, cruel Catholics. So for those people, 私たちの時代、16、17世紀の時代の人々で彼女特にひどかった。That's why I'm showing these burning pictures and everything. 客観的に, objectively, no, she wasn't so terrible. Her father was worse. Elizabeth was pretty bad. Okay? But for the people of that time, she was a symbol of the cruelty of the Catholic religion. That's what she became. That's why I'm showing these pictures of flame. So, 特にメリーがひどいと言いたくない。かの時代の人々が彼がひどいということを言いたい。So, yes, all right. Let's give you the shocking pictures. Okay, that's the image that we have of Mary. All right. Okay, so let's look at her reign. Edward tried to stop her from being queen, and he wanted his cousin, who was also a Protestant, Lady Jane Grey. He wanted her to be queen, and poor Lady Jane Grey, かわいそうな彼女. She didn't want to be queen. But after Edward died, しょうがないから, she said, oh, okay, I suppose I have to be queen. But 9 days later, Mary came, and メリーの方が人気だったので, as I say, Catholic religion was still popular. Mary was popular. So she was more popular, and Lady Jane 飛ばされた. She was the queen who never really was. 9 days after her cousin's death, after Edward's death, she was pushed out, and after that, of course, she was killed. Okay? Poor woman, she never wanted to be queen. She suffered a very unfortunate fate. Well, equally, in the same way, Mary didn't want Elizabeth to be the next queen, because again, Elizabeth was a Protestant. So the fight was not just who will be the next king or queen, but Protestants wanted a Protestant king or queen, Catholics wanted a Catholic king or queen. And all across England was the same feeling. So in this case, Mary's supporters were strong enough to put her as a Catholic on the throne, make her queen. And she knew her position was not strong because she needed a son, she needed a child, especially a son, to be the next Catholic king of England. So she needed a husband. And what did she do? Well, her mother was Spanish, and she chose Prince Philip of Spain as her husband. Now, although many English people wanted a Catholic country, a lot of them were a little bit frightened of Spain. Even if they wanted a Catholic England, they felt uncomfortable, some of them, with England being under the power of Spain. 今までイギリスはずっと独立でしたので、it was an independent country. People were worried at the idea that England may come under the control of Spain through marriage to a Spanish king, a prince. Well, he was a prince and then he became king. So English law at that time meant that when a woman married, all her property belonged to her husband. So if Mary marries, England belongs to Prince Philip. And indeed, Prince Philip was King of England. But luckily for the English people, he didn't do anything very much. The main thing he did was to try to have a child, to try to give Mary the son that she wanted, but even that didn't work out. So there was a rebellion, and Thomas Wyatt and his followers tried to push Mary out as queen and stop the marriage, but no, the marriage went ahead, and the Spanish Prince Philip became the King of England and Ireland, and of Wales and more Haiti. So it would be he's the King of England. England no naka Wales and more England no naka ni narimashita, isho ni narimashita. So England and Ireland, but England including Wales. So except for Scotland. Scotland was still independent. And then, unfortunately, Mary had a personal disaster. She experienced a false pregnancy. She thought that she was pregnant. She stopped menstruating. She was believed to be pregnant, but at the time that the baby was supposed to be born, well, nothing happened. It was what we call a false or phantom pregnancy. She wasn't really having a baby. Quite why this happened or how this happened, we don't know, but that's what happened. So at this stage, Philip just said, dewa, sayonara, sayonara. If it's like that, I'm going. He just left. He went off to France to, I've got wars to fight, I've got important things to do, I'm a prince. So he went off to Europe and did his important things, leaving Mary and really basically never going back to her. So she was abandoned more or less by her husband. She didn't have the child she thought she was going to have. And what did Henry think? What did her father think when he couldn't have a son? It's God's punishment. It's God's punishment because I married my brother's wife. Well, Mary had the same idea. She decided this must be a punishment from God. And in her case, she decided it's because she had tolerated heretics. She hadn't taken action against heretics in her country. She had not punished the Protestants. God wants me to punish them. Then he would, if I punished the Protestants, if I did not allow the Protestants in my country, then I would have a child. Or he would not punish me for not having done this. So she kind of convinced herself that that was the reason. And so the timing is a little bit off, but probably that's a big part of why she started punishing the Protestants. Because before that, she wasn't. Okay, the burnings started after this, basically. Here she is, not looking very gentle in this contemporary portrait. And the executions began in February 1555. Probably by this time she knew in herself that she wasn't really pregnant, or she suspected. I don't know, there's debate about the exact connection between the burnings and the pregnancy, but it seems likely that was quite an important part of changing her attitude, because at the beginning she promised, no, I will not punish any Protestants. I will accept them. But then this started, and possibly, or very likely, it was connected with her false pregnancy in some way. And there they are, all right? These are the names of the people who were burned. Right? Sometimes we don't know the name, we just have unknown person, but these are mostly we know their names, we know who they were, and these names, again, they are an important symbol. They became a very, very important symbol of 16th and 17th century England. There was a book called Acts and Monuments, or popularly known as the Book of Martyrs. And in the Book of Martyrs, we have all the details, all exact details from people who watched them being burned. How did they die? Did they scream? Did they ask for mercy? Were they brave? We know in some cases, in one case, it was a woman who had a baby in her stomach. It said that the baby fell out and somebody picked it up and threw the baby back on the fire. Okay? Sorry if you're sensitive. I just want to say these were nasty times. These burnings had a huge influence on England for hundreds of years. All right? Emphasizing it again with these graphics, okay? It was a big thing, all right? Mary was the symbol of Catholic cruelty through the burning of these people. Okay? All right. Basically, that's it.